The invention of railways changed the face of travel forever. Crossing vast distances, they provide an easy and fast way of transporting people and cargo from place to place in a fraction of the time it would take otherwise. It's for this reason that railways form the backbone of transportation networks worldwide. Due to the nature of how they cross all types of terrain, however, not every route is necessarily the safest way to travel. So strap yourself in and prepare for the ride of your life as we take a look at the 15 most dangerous railways on Earth. Number 15. The Devil's Nose, Ecuador. Making up part of the Trans-Andean Railway that connects Awasi to Sabambe in Ecuador, the Devil's Nose train is one of the most exciting routes in the world. With a journey time of around 2.5 hours, you'll pass along a zigzagging track alongside vertical cliff edges, and while beginning at 5,900 feet above sea level, descends more than 3,000 feet in just 7.5 miles. As you can imagine, the surrounding landscape is treacherous, and there was a huge cost in building the track in the first place. Taking 33 years to finish between 1872 and 1905, it was constructed by 4,000 workers from Jamaica and other nearby regions, and it's thought as many as 2,000 of them died during the process, mainly as a result of illnesses, rock slides, and other difficulties with the terrain. That wasn't the end of the danger related to the route, though, as it used to be possible to sit on top of the train to give stunning views. Unfortunately, 2 passengers were decapitated when doing this when the train passed under a low-hanging electrical cable, so now everyone has to stay inside at all times. Number 14. The Napier-Gisborne Railway, New Zealand. The Palmerston to Gisborne line in New Zealand was built between 1872 and 1942 and instantly became a vital route across the country for passengers and freight. For the vast majority of the route, nothing looks out of the ordinary. But the section between Napier and Gisborne is one of the only railways in the world that passes across an active airport runway. The reason for this unusual planning was simply because of the lack of space. The railway was, of course, built long before the airport. But when authorities wanted to bring air travel to the region, they realized there wasn't enough flat land available to fully dedicate to an airport. The only alternative was to allow the runway to bisect the railway, because diverting the rail line would itself be far too costly, disruptive, and time-consuming. Of course, great effort has been made to ensure that a train and a plane don't ever cross paths there, with air traffic control in constant communication with the rail authorities about where the trains are on the track. But there's always a chance, albeit a slim one, that one day things won't go entirely to plan. Number 13. Argo Train Railroad, Indonesia. The Argo train, which is also known as the Gopar, is operated by the Indonesian Railway Company on a route between Gambir Railway Station in Jakarta and Bandung in Java. Regarded as an executive-class train, it covers the 103-mile distance in around 3 hours. While the cities of Indonesia are heavily built up, the countryside is covered in pristine forest, and the railway passes through regions where there aren't any signs of human life for miles around. 20 trains go in each direction every day, and it's the most luxurious way to do the journey, with air-conditioned cars, a dining car with prayer facilities, TVs throughout, and the capacity for up to 400 passengers. On certain services, there's also a priority class coach that has video-on-demand services on each seat, a bar, dedicated attendants, and improved toilet facilities. But no matter how much you pay for the trip, there's one thing you can't avoid: its particularly dangerous route. When designing one section of the railway that crosses a valley, engineers realized that the gradient differential, along with what would be needed to clear the land for the track, was simply impossible to do within budget. They had to look for a radical solution, and their answer was a rickety bridge that crosses the 2 sides and is almost 200 feet high above the valley floor. The view may well be spectacular, but the first time you cross this bridge, you'll almost certainly be holding on for dear life. Number 12. Georgetown Loop Railroad, USA. Located in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the Georgetown Loop Railroad is a 4.5-mile long stretch of track that takes passengers 640 feet up into the mountains through spectacular but treacherous terrain. Opened in 1877, it was an astonishing accomplishment for the time. The railway is twice the length of the real-world distance it covers, because to traverse the landscape it's made up of a series of horseshoe curves, gradients of up to 4%, and 4 bridges across Clear Creek, one of which is known as the Devil's Gate High Bridge, and is one of the most terrifying and incredible railway bridges in the world. To finish it off is the loop that gives the railroad its name, which turns back around at the top of the gorge. Since land wasn't anywhere near flat enough to build this curve, engineers instead constructed a 95-foot-tall trestle that the tracks were laid upon, something that's largely remained untouched since it was first put in place there more than 120 years ago. While the line was originally used to help support mines in the area, it soon became more known as a tourist attraction, and despite being closed for almost half of the 20th century, it reopened in 1984 and now welcomes tens of thousands of visitors each year. Number 11. The Qinghai-Tibet Railway, China-Tibet. Connecting Xining and the Qinghai province of China with Lhasa in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China, the Qinghai-Tibet Railway holds the record as having the highest section of operational railroad in the world. It covers a distance of 1,200 miles and was a massive undertaking to build. It was done in 2 sections, the first of which was completed in 1984, and the second, which took a further 22 years before it opened. Due to its extreme altitude and likely because of political reasons, Tibet was the last part of China to be connected with a railway, and some of the statistics are almost unbelievable. The Tanggula Pass is the highest point on the railway, reaching 16,640 feet above sea level. While at an elevation of 16,627 feet, the Tanggula Station is the highest station in the world. There's also the Fengguoshan Tunnel, which is the highest railway tunnel in the world at 16,093 feet above sea level. There are 675 bridges along the route, and at least 340 miles of track that's laid on top of permafrost. Beyond the engineering challenges of building the railway, only special trains can travel along it. The altitude means that oxygen levels in the air are much lower, so each train has a doctor on board and a personal oxygen supply for each passenger in case they encounter difficulties. You also have to sign a waiver before boarding to say that you understand the risks of high-altitude travel, but despite these precautions, there have been several known fatalities over the past few years that are linked with oxygen deficiencies. Number 10. Pilatus Railway, Switzerland. The Pilatus Railway in Switzerland connects Alpnachstad, which is next to Lake Alpnach, with a station at the Essel summit at an elevation of 6,800 feet. First opened in 1889 for steam trains and then reopened in 1937 for electric trains, it climbs a vertical distance of 5,300 feet along a stretch of line that's just 2.8 miles long. To do this, it travels at inclines of up to 48%, with an average of 35%, which makes it easily the steepest rack railway in the world. The rack system, which involves a series of teeth between the rails that the train climbs up with a cog wheel, ensures that the trains will only move in the desired direction, and means that there aren't any points or switches on the line like there are with other conventional railways. The rails were all secured on solid rock with iron ties, ensuring they stay firmly in place without any need for ballast. While this all sounds safe in theory, the thing that makes this railway so potentially dangerous is its age. The rack rails in use are still the original ones that were laid more than a century ago, and when engineers realized they were beginning to wear away, their solution was to simply turn the rails over onto the other side. Because of the increase of sliding, the railway is only operational between May and October each year, when snowfall is at a minimum, and there are plans in the near future to replace everything to ensure it remains fit for purpose for at least the next 100 years. Number 9. Makelong Railway, Thailand. The Makelong Railway in Thailand is the primary route connecting Muonglyon and Bangkok with Samut Songkhram in the central region of the country. Covering a distance of 42 miles, it's actually split into 2 sections because of the vast Ta Chin River that carves through the landscape, and the only way to get to between the stations on either bank of the river is by boat. While the vast majority of the line has been built along flat ground through sparsely populated areas, there's one section that seems absolutely crazy to visitors from other countries, and it's why it's regarded as so potentially dangerous. That's because it passes through the Makelong Railway Market, which is one of the country's largest fresh seafood markets and is built up around the actual track. It has the nickname Talat Ramhup, which means umbrella pull-down market, because when a train reaches the stretch of track, the stall owners pack up their things and move further away from the rails while it passes. before putting them back in place once the train is gone. With 17 trains passing in each direction per day, and there being no signals on the entire length of the line, all it would take is one mistake and the results could be deadly. The only counter to this is that it's also one of the slowest moving trains in the world, with an average speed along the line of just 18.5 miles per hour. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Kuranda Scenic Railway, Australia. Opened in 1891 and operating virtually constantly since then to this day, the Kuranda Scenic Railway is a 23-mile-long route that travels between the city of Cairns in Queensland, Australia, and the inland town of Kuranda. Between the two is the Great Dividing Range, the largest mountain range in Australia and the 5th largest non-oceanic mountain range in the world, which means the railway takes a winding and treacherous route to get to its destination. It took more than 5 years to build and includes 15 hand-built tunnels and 37 bridges, all of which take it from sea level at the start to an altitude of 1,100 feet. An unknown number of workers died during construction, and the same dangers they face still pose a risk to trains that travel along the track. In 2010, for instance, a train was derailed and 5 passengers were seriously injured when a landslide dropped several tons of rock onto the track as the train was passing through. Still, despite these risks, it's seen as one of the most beautiful and scenic rail routes in the whole world, and is now only used for tourism purposes since an alternative, faster and more reliable route was built for freight and passenger services. Number 7. Train to the Clouds, Argentina. The amazingly named Train to the Clouds is a rail route in Argentina that connects the city of Salta with the Chilean city of Polvoria, that's on the mountain border between the two countries. It's the 5th highest railway in the world, maintaining an average altitude of 13,800 feet above sea level, and while it was originally built for the transportation of goods and passengers, it's now only used as a tourist line. Along the route, the train passes across 29 bridges, 21 tunnels, 13 viaducts, 2 spirals, and 2 zigzags, and the reason why it's so complicated is that the decision was made early on in its design not to use rack rails, and instead use normal rails. This means that the gradient had to be kept to a minimum along the 130-mile route, and for the most part, it worked perfectly. It attracts visitors from far and wide who want to see the spectacular views. But when something goes wrong, it passes through such a remote region that it's difficult to tackle any difficulties. In 2005, one of the trains broke down at an altitude of 11,500 feet, which resulted in the passengers having to be evacuated by helicopter and led to 37 miles of track having to be replaced. Then in 2014, a similar thing happened when a train was derailed at an altitude of 13,000 feet, and again the passengers had to be evacuated by helicopter. Currently, because of safety concerns, at least 80% of the route is now served by bus instead of train, but it's hoped that one day tourists will again be able to experience the full majesty of the Train to the Clouds. Number 6. Aso Miami Route, Japan. Japan is known for having the most reliable and fastest train network in the world, so much so that if a train does ever run late, the drivers are often relieved of their jobs, and all passengers are given cards as proof for their workplaces that their reason for being late is true. But while this is the case for urban and intercity services, the rail lines in rural Japan are on an equal footing to what you'd expect to see elsewhere in the world, and in some cases seem incredibly dangerous. The Aso Miami route is the best example of this. Opened in 1928, it travels between Tateno Station in Miami Aso and Takamori Station in Takamori. At just 11 miles long, it doesn't look too treacherous on a map, but that's before you realize that directly between the two stations is Mount Aso, a historically active volcano, and the train line goes right around it. There aren't many rail routes in the world where a volcanic eruption is a legitimate risk, but you only need to see the flattened trees around the track that have fallen victim to lava flows. In recent years, the railway has actually been completely shut while repairs are carried out, but on this occasion it wasn't as a result of a volcano, but because of a powerful series of earthquakes that struck the region in 2016. Number 5. Utenica, Tuccio, South Africa. With rail lines around the rest of the world, South Africa once had a vast network of steam-powered locomotives, but as the lines were electrified, the sight of a steam tram became increasingly rare. The last remaining one was the Utenica Tuccio, and the reason why its line was never fitted with electric cables was that the route was so treacherous. Connecting the towns of George and Kinsna in the country's western province, its 42-mile stretch of track that passes by some of the most stunning scenery in South Africa has to offer. It follows a spectacular section of garden route along the coastline, and finally crosses the part that it's most famous for, a huge bridge that crosses a lagoon before reaching Kinsna. This and several other bridges along its path are what makes it such a potentially dangerous route, simply because very little has been done to maintain them since they were first finished almost a century ago. Nowadays, the route is only used for tourist trips, which means it receives even less investment than the commuter railway, but fortunately incidents on the line remain relatively rare. Number 4. Veracruz, Mexico. Veracruz is one of the 32 states of Mexico and covers a large stretch of the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico. It's an important region to the country's economy, particularly for the climate that's so good for growing crops. But it's also become known in recent years as a hotspot for gang activity. The trains that travel the railways in the region are known to carry wealthier passengers or potentially valuable cargo, so it's one of the most likely places in the world where you might find yourself in the middle of a train hijacking. In December of 2020, for example, a train heading through Alcotzingo on its way to the port city of Veracruz with consignment of Volkswagen cars to export was derailed after the train tracks were sabotaged. The culprits had removed more than 6 feet of track, so the train had no chance. Some of the cars were completely flipped over and others fell down a ravine, but luckily no one was injured. That can't be said for many of the other incidents that happen on the railways there. With regular armed hijackings by local militia, the best advice if you're traveling through the region is to think long and hard about whether you really want to do so by rail. Number 3. Pemben Bridge, India. The Pemben Bridge in India, which opened in 1914, was the first sea bridge to be built in India and connects Pemben Island with the mainland and the town of Mendapam. It was a marvel of engineering at the time, with the majority of the track laid on a bridge on 143 concrete pillars, but with a section halfway along it that's a double-leaf bascule bridge, which means it can be raised to allow ships to pass through. The entire bridge itself is 6,700 feet long and is 41 feet above the waterline, and until the late 1980s was the main connection between the island and the mainland. As time progressed, once it had opened, it became clear that the design had meant trains traveling along the route were at risk of dangers, however. In particular, what happens when a storm moves in. With a flat ocean around, there's no natural formations to break up the wind, so it's able to whip the sea up and in some cases create waves that crash over the bridge. Any train that's on there at the time would almost certainly be washed into the water, so it's unable to operate even if there's a slight chance of unfavorable weather. There have been several times in the bridge's history where a storm has caused such significant damage that it's been forced to close for extended periods of time, and the worst event happened in 1964, when a 25-foot storm surge struck, which overturned the train and killed all 150 passengers on board. Number 2. The Burma Railway, Thailand. The Burma Railway, which is often referred to as the Death Railway, is unfortunately the route in the world that has caused the greatest loss of life. It covers the 258-mile distance between Banpong in Thailand and Tanbusiat in Burma, and was built by the Empire of Japan during the Second World War to transport troops and weaponry to the Burma campaign. They were so desperate to build it quickly that they used slave labor and paid very little attention to the conditions these people were kept in. As many as 250,000 civilian laborers from Southeast Asia were forced to work on the project, along with 60,000 Allied prisoners, and the death toll was unforgivable. It's believed that as many as 90,000 Southeast Asian civilians died during its construction, along with a further 12,000 prisoners, mostly due to beatings by the Japanese guards and illnesses brought on by the unsanitary conditions they were forced to live in. Today, if you travel along the line, you'll see countless memorials to those that lost their lives there, in an attempt to never forget what happened and to never let something like that ever happen again. Number 1. The Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, New Mexico, Colorado. The Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad covers a 64-mile route between Antonito in Colorado and Chama in New Mexico. While in its current guise it was first opened in 1970, it takes passengers along a route that was completed in 1880 and vital to supplying the miners involved in the gold rush. Because it had to reach extremely remote areas, a normal gauge railroad simply wasn't going to work. Instead, engineers built it with a 3-foot gauge instead of the normal 4 feet and 8 inches, and this allowed it to curve around cliff edges and treacherous overhangs. Not only did operators of the railroad have to deal with careful weight management to ensure the trains remained on the tracks, but there were serious weather conditions to contend with too, especially in one stretch, called the Cumbres Pass, which at an altitude of 10,000 feet could see as much as 500 inches of snowfall across a winter. Now, though, it only operates as a tourist attraction, but even this has its dangers. The route has had to be closed several times in recent years because of either the risk of wildfires or because of damage caused by fire, and there's usually very little warning about when these infernos may strike. Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.